Hey everyone, this is Shawn Garrett, founding attorney of Garrett PLC, founder of the Legal Eagle podcast. As you know, my goal with this podcast is not to brain dump complex business law, criminal law today, or tax concepts, but instead to highlight some of the entrepreneurs, business leaders, and the communities that I serve. As you know, I'm licensed practice law in North Carolina, South Carolina, Illinois, Missouri. So most of these stories are going to be coming from Charlotte, Greenville, Chicago, and St. Louis. Today we have John J. Dowling III of Dowling Defense. Am I right? Is that the name of the firm?
Dowling Defense Group.
Dowling Defense Group. John, thanks for having us on. Thanks for being on today. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about all the topics we discussed earlier.
Yeah, certainly. Let's just start pretty broad. How and why did you get into criminal law and get into the specifics? You're not just a normal criminal attorney.
Right. So I always knew that I wanted to be an attorney from a young age. I found it rewarding to advocate for people who couldn't do so themselves for one reason or another. I always found that I was pretty good at communicating and resolving disputes between friends and other people. So I think that the criminal law aspect in particular, I always found it to be unfair in school when someone would get in trouble for something that I didn't think was justified, or I didn't think that the sanction or the punishment was commensurate with the conduct. And that was both for my friends and myself sometimes. And I found that I often had to advocate for myself when I would get in trouble in school. And it just became sort of a natural path going into law and criminal defense to advocate for other people. So that's how largely I got into criminal law, one way or another.
I love that. So you know a bit about my practice. You know I'm advising business owners as they're starting, growing, scaling their businesses. One thing that overlaps in our worlds is D&O insurance policies. Typically, I'm advising my clients why we do or do not want to put certain reps and warranties into agreements, what it means when they are coming on board as a director or an officer of a company. Walk me through some of the things that you see on the back end, how people run afoul, how they get into trouble with certain directors and officers' actions that they can take, and how are these policies going to protect them? How's an insurance policy going to protect them?
Right. So what we do is white collar criminal defense in state and federal court. And the thing is, very often a criminal investigation, it will not begin with criminal charges. It will begin with exactly like it's called, an investigation. So it can be extremely expensive to hire a criminal defense attorney to protect your interests during that time period and advise you. In your capacity as an officer of a company, or even just in your individual capacity. So with the director and officer insurance, we always want to look and see if the policy is covering costs associated with hiring criminal defense counsel. Because of course, if you can activate one of those policies and have a third party pay for your criminal defense counsel, that's going to be a way to save you a lot of money. Whether you're guilty or not, you still need to have the advice of competent counsel. And if you can avoid paying for that yourself, then that's very important. So we often look to see if one of those policies is in effect. And then so that's on the back end. But then on the front end, I think, as you mentioned, no one really plans on getting criminally investigated. But still, when you're joining a company, or you're setting up the structuring the entity and looking down the line, I think it can be very wise to look at the scope of coverage for a director and officer policy and see what the exclusions are, and see if you can negotiate a situation where you are covered.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So tossing out an example, let's say I have a client and he is coming into a company, or being made an offer to join a company as a director that's been in operation for the last decade. What type of conversation would you have with him from the criminal side of things, preparing him for potential exposure to liability, what type of advising would you do on the front end to help keep him out of hot water on the back end?
Right. So I think with respect to the policy, I mean, I think that's more your wheelhouse in terms of negotiating the employment, the scope of the benefits, and the coverage package. I think that I wouldn't be so much involved on the front end. It would be more so on the back end, seeing what the policy looks like.
Once
Um,
he's
I
once he's once the crime has been committed.
or once the investigation has commenced. And I think that this is very important too, that the importance of having one of these D&O policies in place that does cover the costs associated with a criminal investigation. I think it's much more important when you're operating in a highly regulated industry such as healthcare or securities. Um, because these highly regulated industries, as we've seen over the last several years, there's a lot of scrutiny from federal law enforcement and federal regulators, and I think that it's much easier to step out of bounds, either intentionally or unintentionally. And I think that that's when criminal investigations are more likely to occur. It's in these highly regulated spaces, like I said, healthcare, securities. So I think that people operating in that space might want to think about the coverage of a D&O policy a little bit more than someone who's not operating in a space like that.
Yeah, yeah. So to answer that, how I would advise, a lot of times I'm going to want to ensure that they're not liable for any actions that have taken place prior to them coming on board. If there's some type of employment agreement, I'm going to say, let's ensure that there's a prior acts date. There are any prior acts, or ensuring that a D&O policy protects them for prior acts. Just to ensure that they're covered. Those are some things that I see that kind of trip people up. They get involved as a CFO, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, they found out the books are a mess, and they're afraid of what happened. What could happen to them for their 6 months of engagement or employment, but the company's been in operation super long, so or for a very long time. So
Interesting.
yeah, no, I think that's all great feedback. So I appreciate that. You mentioned picking the right lawyer. A couple questions popped in my brain there when it comes to let's start with the beginning. Can they choose their own attorney under an insurance policy like that, or will they have someone appointed? What are the pros and cons of both?
That's an interesting question. I think that's going to depend on the particular policy. The pros of picking your own lawyer are going to be that you're going to be able to go with the lawyer that you feel most comfortable with. If somebody else selects the attorney for you, that won't necessarily be the case. Sometimes if the company is selecting the lawyer, they may be selecting a lawyer that they think is going to be operating with the company's interests at the forefront. Although every attorney has an obligation to have their own client's interests at the forefront, sometimes an employee or an officer, they may feel as if their lawyer is playing games with them and is not actually advising them as they should, and that lawyer's loyalty is really to the company. So it's largely going to depend on the language of the policy, but to the extent that one would typically want to select their own attorney.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. Anytime you have counsel that you are competent or comfortable with, and is competent, that's typically going to result in a hopefully more favorable outcome because you've got someone who's invested in you and invested in the transaction. So,
Sure.
so when it comes to picking the right lawyer, I know this, you know this. I'm going to ask a very general question as it applies to your world. Why are you not, or why is a client not going to call let's make it super simple, their family lawyer? Or why are they not going to call their state level criminal attorney? What are the benefits of calling someone like yourself who, has experience in the federal court system?
Right. So I think this is very important. I think that non-lawyers all too often they assume that they need to simply, when an issue arises that they think they need representation on or legal counsel, they will assume largely that any lawyer can help them, or a lawyer that they know, or a lawyer that they think is smart. But that's really not the case. I analogize it to doctors. If you have a problem with your cardiovascular system, and your best friend is a just a different type of doctor, not a cardiologist. That non-cardiologist is probably not going to be the best person to speak to, because although they're educated in medicine, they're not educated in that specific subset of medicine. Same thing for lawyers. Lawyers who specialize in certain practice areas, or who focus on certain practice areas, they're well versed on the updates, the latest cutting edge legal arguments and strategies in that practice space. And if someone in a corporate setting, if they pick a lawyer that doesn't do white collar criminal defense, does not have experience dealing with the FBI, the lawyer that they pick just may completely miss things, and you just don't know what you don't know. So it's very important to pick someone who's well versed for the job. Just like someone who needed to file something with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, they needed to file for a copyright or trademark, they wouldn't call my law firm. They might call your law firm. So that's not something, right? It's important that you pick the right man for the job.
Yeah, for sure. I analogize it. I love analogies. I'm sure you do too. To a knife, you can use a bread knife to cut your steak. It's not going to be clean. It's not going to be convenient. It's not going to be precise, and you may waste time and money doing it. Truthfully, you also may not end up with the result that you want. If you're using a bread knife. It may look like a knife, may sound like a knife, may cut like a knife, but use the right tool for the job. I like that.
Mm.
All right, so I've got a client. FBI shows up on their doorstep with a piece of paper. What are their next steps? What should the next step be?
Interesting. Yeah. So this is a classic. This is a classic scenario where the law enforcement, whether it's FBI, the DEA, or another law enforcement component, they show up to a business or to an individual's home, and they want to do one of two things. They may want to interview you, and they may want to serve you with a subpoena for records, or to have you come testify before a federal grand jury. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking immediately that they are the target of a criminal investigation. And in many cases, that's just not true. Many people the law enforcement may want to speak to you because they think that you have information related to the misconduct of someone else, or they may simply think that you have just records in your possession, digital or physical records that relate to a transaction that had related to a crime. So you don't want to panic, but you also don't want to speak to law enforcement right away. You want to respectfully decline to engage in that interview, and you want to seek the advice of counsel first.
No, I think that's awesome. Now, I asked that pretty specifically in terms of it's just a piece of paper. But what happens if it's a search warrant, or it's something that allows the FBI access to the property or the premises immediately? Then what's the analysis?
Very, very similar. So the analysis is that if there is a search warrant, you don't want to interfere with law enforcement. I think most people would understand that if there is a search warrant in hand, and there's a team of law enforcement officials coming to search the business or the private or the residence, you obviously don't want to physically interfere with that. But what you especially don't want to do is you don't want to sit there and just start making statements, trying to explain things, and trying to save yourself. That's almost always going to make the situation worse. What you want to do is call an attorney right away, speak to the attorney, and basically let the search happen. Once the search is being conducted and they're executing that search warrant, there's nothing that you can do to stop that process. There are things that your attorney can do on the back end related to the validity of the search warrant, the authorization or lack thereof for the search. But on the spot, in real time, there's nothing you can do when a search warrant's being executed. The only thing that you could potentially do is make your situation worse by speaking to law enforcement. So you want to be respectful, be polite. If they ask to interview you, respectfully decline and say you'd like to step outside and call your attorney.
Certainly, certainly. That's awesome. Well, we've got another minute left. I typically, I think I'm a very golf favor type person. I love golfing, and this is a golf themed legal podcast. So I ask all my attendees, to give me an analogy of an eagle in their life. I'm not sure if you've golfed before. Par, it's cool. We're okay with par. Birdie, one under. We like birdies. They're better. An eagle, it's just rare. It doesn't really happen. So in your industry, in your world, what's an eagle for you when it comes to a client? Give me that analogy.
I love this question. It is persuading federal law enforcement to decline prosecution entirely. Very often people think of the best criminal defense lawyers as the ones who win at trial and get a not guilty verdict. And that's great. And we love doing that as well. But trial is a lot of risk. It's very expensive. There's bad publicity. And it may be very hard to come back from that reputation wise. But when we are able to stop the investigation in the middle and persuade law enforcement or the U.S. Attorney's Office to decline charges entirely, and the case goes away without publicity, without a trial, without the expense associated with the trial, that is, in my view, the best victory that you can have for a client. And one of our signature cases was exactly that outcome. Our client, a tax preparer, was being investigated for paycheck protection fraud, and the government wanted him to plead guilty right away, and we declined that offer, and we persuaded the U.S. Attorney's Office that our client should not be charged, and he was not, and that is he's very happy about that. There was no bad publicity. His reputation is intact. He didn't have to pay us to try the case. No long, dragged out process. So that is an eagle, in my view, to persuade the United States Attorney's Office to decline charges altogether and not to charge your client with a crime at all.
I love that. That'd be an eagle in my book. Awesome, John. How does everyone find you? What's the best way for people to find you?
Sure. So our website is dowlingdefensegroup.com, and then on LinkedIn you can find me. If you just search John J. Dowling III, it should come right up. Federal criminal defense attorney based in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Awesome. John, thanks so much for being on, man.
Thanks a lot.